G'day everyone, welcome back to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you back to our ongoing discussions around this thing called leadership. Thanks for joining me. I hope everyone's well in the ongoing COVID crisis. So by way of introduction to today's podcast, my guest is the Managing Director of the Breakthrough Company. Can I welcome to the podcast Ryan Castle? How are you, mate?
Eric, I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Mate, appreciate you coming along. So before we get started, by way of just a bit of a description of where you work, what is the Breakthrough Company and what do you do there, mate?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Look, Breakthrough is very focused these days, and it's been a bit of a journey with the Breakthrough, but we've become very focused around operational leadership and particularly the development of operational leaders. We continually found we'd been working with executive teams and with business owners, and we continually found this capability gap between kind of the senior team and then the next layer down. And so often strategic executions or strategic plans in the business were falling over because there was this capability gap. So we've found that if you can raise the capability of those leaders in the operational level, the chance of you executing your strategy, increasing engagements in your team, etc., makes a huge difference. So that's become a real focus for us.
Brilliant. Well, so this segues nicely into the first of my themes that I engage in this particular set of podcasts. So for you personally, Ryan, what was the start of your leadership pathway, if I can start there?
Absolutely. Look, it probably goes right back to observing my surroundings, and I think you grow like your surroundings. And I was fortunate to have a family environment that had some pretty strong leaders in it. My dad happened to be the captain of the New Zealand Rugby League team, so I guess he had some pretty natural and probably developed leadership skills, and I was around those regularly. I grew up at a iconic rugby league ground called Carlisle Park here. That was kind of where I spent every Saturday and Sunday. So I was around a lot of leaders. I observed leadership in a cultural context, because after the games you would go back to the club rooms and all the kids would be running around, and then a strong Māori influence in that group. So they would all bring out their guitars, and you saw leaders bring people together through music and their cultural experience. So I guess I was kind of around leadership in a big way. My mum went on to represent New Zealand in lawn bowl. She's been to 4 Commonwealth Games, so I've seen how she's led in teams in that environment as well. And then my sister Raylene used to be the chief executive at the Bulldogs, the NRL club. She then went on to Australian rugby, and some of your listeners might be familiar with Raylene's profile through elements like Israel Folau and what went down there, and some both challenging and successful times at Australian rugby. So of course a lot of discussions in context with her, and that's been certainly helped shape my leadership journey, being around people in my family. And then I think my own journey, leadership, it even goes back to primary school, and it was probably just that person that was always trying to bring people together to get a game of footy or something going at the lunchtime break. And that wasn't something I was thinking about and going, I'd like to be a leader, but there was probably a bit of a natural affinity there for me to try and bring people together and achieve an outcome. And that's progressed, from, I guess, a primary school level right through to, my business career, and then into where we focus now with the Breakthrough and developing leaders.
Wow, that's amazing. And one of the things that strikes me, and it's a consistent theme through the podcast, at least the ones that I've been able to publish, Ryan, is that the seminal moments for people in their leadership journey always tend to go back to either a school setting, a sports setting, or a sports and cultural setting. One of the things that's of interest to me, given that you've obviously grown up in the New Zealand context, is how much of an influence does that had in the way that you view the leadership lens, your lens for leadership? Is it culturally influenced that way or not?
Yeah, great question, Eric. It's probably not something I've reflected on a lot. Thinking about that off the top of my head, I think we see influence of Māori culture a lot, and I'm really excited to see that coming to the forefront even more in New Zealand. My sense is that we're maybe slightly ahead in the culture curve with Indigenous people compared to maybe where Australia is at. Others might have a different opinion, but that's my observation, having spent time in both countries. And I think the Māori culture has a word that we refer to as mana, and it's that expression of someone who has a presence, they know how to lead, people tend to gravitate towards them. Now, that doesn't it's quite different to the concept of charisma, or at least the common interpretation of charisma, where you see this very dynamic person at the front of the room and everyone's kind of drawn to that sense. Mana in multiculture might actually be the person that sits in the corner, and they in an entire meeting might say 2 words, but those 2 words just have phenomenal impact, and you immediately go, wow, that person just has phenomenal mana. They are respected in the community because of not through title, not through age, not through seniority, but because they have this concept of mana. So I would say that mana is something to aspire towards, and a influence of the culture in my leadership would be that observing those people with mana and going, wow, I'd really like to aspire to be like that as well.
It's always interesting with these podcasts, and when I've been speaking to people and the cultural context has come up, that it's always quite a unique thing. Let me ask you this, Ryan. You've been around the traps, you know what effective and not so effective leadership. In that context, in the leadership context, do you see a significant difference, or a difference, if any, between that leader function and the managerial function in an organization?
I do, and this becomes like a complex our discussion, and it's something that we reflect on a lot in our own business, particularly around when we're talking to organizations that we'd like to work with. Should we be talking to them about leadership, or should we be talking to them about management? I feel like those terms get used quite interchangeably, and sometimes people are talking about leadership, but it's really what we'd refer to as management, and vice versa. So it presents a marketing conundrum. Look, I still think the good old Peter Drucker quote of management is doing things right and leadership is doing the right things. I still find that, for me, is a good kind of centering piece when I'm thinking about the continuum of management and leadership. So that's a good centering piece for me and our organization when we think about management. And because we're so focused in that operational layer, we think we're developing management skills. Now, people will often will go, hey, we really want to grow the leadership capability of our operational managers. And yes, they cross over, but when they say that, we hear actually what you want to develop is your management capability and your operational layer. So we would see that continuum shifting. If we looked at someone who may be in a first-time people leadership role, they would be very much looking to develop their management skills. And then as the tenure and complexity of their leadership role increases through the organization up to, C-suite and even governance, then probably they shift down the continuum more towards a leadership role. Again, coming back to the Drucker quote, team leadership, operational managers, just do things right. So the path has been set, do things right. And then as you move more towards leadership, you're probably evolving more into strategic thinking, and you would need to develop capability more to be able to not just go, here's the task, let's get them executed, but more what are the right tasks? Is this going to take us where the business needs to go? How will that help us address competition, changing factors in the economy? How are we thinking about what the organization might be doing in not just the current horizon, but in horizon 3, which might be 5 or 10 years out for your organization? So yeah, we think about it a bit more as a continuum, but I would say in terms of our sweet spot and where we most look to develop capability, it's in that management capability piece.
Yeah, that's quite a detailed response, and I appreciate that the distinction is quite a stark one if you're looking at the two things, because yes, the leader, for me personally, the leader function is very different to the managerial function. Both are important in an organizational context, but they do different things. So yeah, Drucker's been brought up a couple of times. I guess for me, the leadership function at the highest level is about setting a vision, looking to the future, and being scanning that environmental context in which you're operating to try and find where the next goal is meant to be. Whereas your management cadre in the business are the ones that are going to get you there by operationalizing the dream and actually make it a reality.
Eric, let me add in. I think a piece that we talk about is that managers run today's business, leaders develop tomorrow's. And it's the space that often find leaders failing at, is that they spend way too much time running today's business and not enough time focused on figuring out where are we headed, how will we meet that vision, where are we going to get to. And often the reason they spend so much time involved operationally is because their operational managers lack the capability to run today's business, so they continually get pulled back into the firefighting.
Yeah, that's a great quote. I might have to steal that off you, mate.
Mate, it's not copyrighted, that one. It's all yours.
The next topic, and this one is about the individual leader, not so much the manager. And I'll throw this in terms of your leadership experience, if I can. It's often been said that leadership is a lonely road. Is it as lonely as you make it, or is it that way because of the nature of leadership itself?
Yeah, my experience is that it's only lonely a very, very small amount of the time. I'm very fortunate in a business context that I've got a fantastic business partner in Dr. Mike Ashby, someone that I'd known for 10 years prior to joining Mike in the Breakthrough Company. So I'd had really good insight to him as a person, as a leader. I consider him a mentor as well as a business partner. So I'm very fortunate in that situation. And we're able to bounce off each other when one of us is going, can we get this done? Can we get it sorted? The other's there to kind of bounce off. So I don't experience the loneliness aspect of leadership a lot. I see how people could, particularly if they don't have others around them. But I would also draw an insight into how people operate. We hear a lot of discussion about introversion, extroversion, and I think common misconception is people think of extroversion as the person that wants to be the loudest at the party, who always wants to be at the front of the room, who always wants to be the center of attention. My view of introversion, extroversion is more about where you get your energy from. So contrasting Mike and I'm very, very strong extrovert, so I get my energy from being around people. So I'm less likely to almost put myself in a lonely situation because I'll always be constructing environments where I'm around people and discussing and getting those things done. Now, that's not to say that I don't like some quiet time by myself where I can get rid of the distraction and consider, tomorrow's business that we're building and reflect on how we're doing things currently. I absolutely value that, but I tend to put myself into people's situations as a preference. Interestingly, Mike, my business partner, other end of the scale, he's very strong introvert. He needs his time alone to kind of recharge, get his energy back, does his good thinking in that zone. So the awareness piece is really important, and I think maybe that helps shape the do you find leadership lonely or not. I think if you were a strong introvert and you didn't have sounding boards or mentors or other people around you, I could certainly see how the loneliness aspect could drive a pretty big wedge.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to look at it. And it's hasn't been brought up that way about the introvert extrovert continuum. And for me, I'm I would say a strong introvert, although doing the podcast and reaching out to people I've never met in my life has sort of broken that mold a little bit. But you decide what is comfortable for you. So if you're a strong extrovert, and I got that feeling from you before we started the podcast that some people, it just screams that out, hey, I need people around me. Whereas with others, that time for introspection, but also being able to reach out to trusted colleagues is, I think, an important thing. And you raise that, and I think it's very much part of that leadership process, depending on where you lie on that continuum. If you believe that continuum is where people draw their energy from, I would say personally, I agree with that. Ryan, measuring success. Now you've been obviously in the world of work for a fairly long time, as have I. What for you now at this stage of your leadership journey is a measure of success?
Great question, Eric. This is a bit of a pet topic for me, and I might be taking a slight tangent from the intent of your question, but our core value at the Breakthrough is health, family, and work in that order. And it's the in that order bit that is most important. And the Breakthrough, whilst we're now focused on operational leadership, we had a very strong background in business coaching and advisory. And phenomenal how the default setting for most people is what I'll do is I'll spend all my time doing work. If I've got any time left over, I might spend some time with the family. And if there's still some capacity at the other end of that, then I might look after my health. And when we talk about health, we talk about physical well-being, we talk about mental wealth, and very much the intention around that word being mental wealth rather than mental health. We think you need to top up your mental game and your mental tank just as much as you do your physical. And through personal experience and through having coached and advised hundreds of business leaders now, the people that flip that order around and go, I look after myself first, because if I'm not looking after myself, I can't be a great family member, I can't be a great community member, and I definitely cannot be a great leader at work. That's so critical. And the analogy I often use with people is going, have you been to the office on a day where you've been feeling really, really crook? Now, I know we don't go to work anymore when we've got a runny nose. COVID has definitely changed those times, but we can probably all remember a time where we went, no, I'm going to soldier on. I feel like absolute rubbish, but I'll head on into the office and kind of put on my badge of honor and still deliver the goods. And, you're not fun to be around. You don't tend to make great decisions. You certainly don't encourage good culture in your environment when you're like that. And I think that if you're not taking care of your health in the first instance, then you're bringing some micro version of that into your environment, your work environment, your leadership role every single day. So in terms of how I measure success, I step back and look at my life and I go, am I taking care of myself? Am I taking care of my mental health and my physical wealth? Then I'm going, am I delivering at a family level? Am I engaged? Am I present? I'm very fortunate to have a phenomenal wife and 2 teenage children. And I'm going, my kids might have left home in literally another couple of years. So I've got to really value that time that I'm spending with right now. And yes, we're building a business and scaling what we're doing right here at the moment, but I never put that ahead of spending quality time with them. And when we think family, also think extended family, community, how we're participating in those environments. And then the success measures in work are broad, would be my word. I certainly don't think success is just the number at the bottom of your P&L. I think that's just one of the indicators. I think people engagement is really, really high. Do you have a sense of purpose around what you're doing? Do you and the others in your team feel like getting out of bed and coming to work in the morning? I think those things are more an important measure of success, because if you get those right, then the number at the bottom of the P&L will turn up.
Flipping your thinking around what success is based on what you just talked about, that if you're looking after yourself and your physical and mental well-being, it can only be a good thing for your work as a leader. And we've all had encounters with bosses that have been under the weather, and if you could compare the well boss with the sick boss, where the better decisions are coming from. And most human beings, being who we are, we get grouchy when we're sick and we're not the best around. And I think it's selfish, to go into a confined office space and share the joy that you bring from being crook and give that to other people. I think it's not a good practice. And now with COVID, I reckon for generations to come, anyone with a sniffle is just going to be asked to go home and just stay away from, and it's going to be a new cultural norm as a part of this pandemic. I was going to use the term new normal, but I'm about to shoot myself saying that term. I'm sick of hearing it. I think most people, it's just normal now. It's just what it is will be. All right, look, Ryan, let me ask you, because you've given some hints, and I might take a stab at guessing at it, but I won't, because this podcast is not about me. Leader capabilities. What do you believe are the core leader capabilities in your travels as a leader?
The very first place to start is self-awareness. I think it's impossible to be a great leader if you're not self-aware. So that can be as smaller insight as, how's my energy today? Am I bringing a good vibe into the office? And I've had this discussion with many leaders that they might be in a situation where they're under pressure. There's challenging times going on in their business or their personal life, but they literally hit the reset button in the car park before they walk into the office, because they know that if they bring that negative vibe into the organization, that it just spreads literally like a virus across the organization, leads to bad outcomes. So they, call it game face, call it the leadership attitude, whatever. But it starts with that self-awareness piece. I think something that's helped shape my own leadership was very much understanding from a personal perspective what my work and leadership styles are. And a framework, a lot of the breakthrough is the business chemistry of teams. I don't know if you've come across it, Eric. It's a model that helps people align. It's a quadrant model which says there are pioneers, drivers, guardians, and integrators broadly, and probably doesn't take too much guesswork to figure out what the key traits. The pioneers are always thinking out in the future. They love bright, shiny. They're very good at the new ideas. They don't tend to be very good at the detail. The drivers are the people that are, come on, let's get this stuff organized and sorted and let's make it happen. I am a strong driver. Mike, my business partner, is a strong pioneer. But if we didn't have guardians, which are the people that are very good at the detail, that follow process and develop process really well, they keep transactions going. If we don't have those people in our business, then we're just full of great ideas and no execution. And then, of course, the integrators tend to be the people that are more person-centric. They think about what the cultural element is going on in the team. And for me, just having awareness of where my default setting is, and then understanding the members of my team, where they come from, that's given me great self-awareness to go when we're in a meeting and we might be talking about tomorrow's business, and I can go, I know the guardians are going, hey, that's really great, but what are the 427 steps we're going to use to get there? And I don't have to cover off those 427 steps right there, right then, but I have to acknowledge them, or it's useful to acknowledge them, going, look, don't worry, guardians, we've got this. We realize we're going to need to work through a detailed plan to execute this, and we'll get to that in due course. So I think the self-awareness piece is absolutely number one around leadership capability, and I don't believe you can be a great leader if you're not self-aware. So if someone was going, where should I start, or how could I evolve as a leader, I'd guide them towards the self-awareness piece in the first instance. And then we're probably back to that leadership versus management bit, and I think you need to establish some very strong management fundamentals. So you need to understand what good time management looks like. You have to understand how to manage priorities. I've come across very, very few people who, in fact, none, I think is the number, who don't have more to do than they have time to do it in. So if you don't figure out how to prioritize and do the stuff that adds the value, then you're on a hiding to nothing in my view. And I think one of the biggest steps I see leaders make is when they figure out that they won't solve the challenges in front of them by using their own time. Once you get into that mindset of going, well, I'm not going to solve everything by using my own time, you unlock the power of your brain to go, well, how could I get members of my team? How could I outsource? How could we automate? How could we develop different ways of doing this to make it more effective? Does that stuff even matter? Should we ditch it? Should we delete? Should we get rid of those D-class customers as an example, because they're not adding value to our organization? But again, you don't get there if you haven't got self-awareness. So I think start with self-awareness, build your management, what we would call management fundamentals around those, running good meetings, knowing how to delegate effectively, knowing how to prioritize. I think build those as your capabilities, your foundation of your capabilities. And I think once you've experienced that, then you've got a good base to build on and move towards that more strategic leadership part of the continuum.
And none of what you said would make sense if you don't have that level of self-awareness, that if that's not driving what you're doing, then it's difficult to do anything else. And I think that you've touched on something that, again, I've been hearing through these podcasts, is to be self-aware, to be on that pathway to actualizing who you are and what your priorities are. There's some big steps in doing that, and it's a challenge for some leaders to be fully self-aware, because you have to ask yourself some uncomfortable questions about what are you thinking, and then you use the word prioritization, and that is a huge one. And people, human beings being what we are, is part of least resistance is the easiest way not to do some stuff that's difficult to do. So it's interesting, and I've only heard this in one of my other podcasts, around if your business has A, B, C, and D class clientele, at what point do you need to shed a certain market segment and not worry that that's going to impact on your body? It's a huge, for those listening, you can't see this, but Ryan is smiling quite intently at that statement. And I think that's when the business mind clashes with that long-term vision of where you're going, the daily operational need to meet budgets and make money, it causes a degree of conflict in the thinking around those that are running the business. And it's nothing you can ever get away from, but if there's a tension caused, it means there's something there that needs to be discussed, because if it didn't, then it wouldn't be potentially a problem. And that's a rabbit hole we could go down, and that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah,
it is, Eric, but let me share one very quick story. I was working with a accounting firm some years ago, and they had some clients that were very challenging. They were very D class, and we say, whether a client is a D class because when they call and you see their number on your phone, you get a bit of a sphincter tightening, where you go, oh, I just don't want to talk to those people. We've all had that experience. Like, if that is happening, they're a D class, get them out of your business. But interestingly, this accounting firm decided to once a month, they would have a staff meeting full staff meeting once a month. They would fire a client at that meeting. So people could vote who was the D-class client that organization was going to get rid of. Can you imagine what that did for the culture and the engagement in that organization, where they were going, your performance in this business, is being hindered by these D-class clients. So we will actively, fire them or, pass them on to our competitors because we'll let them run their business. And the empowerment for staff to going, there's this one person that nothing we do is right. They're always clibbling over their bill. They never pay on time. Let's just exit them from our business. And they gave that power to their staff to decide who was going to be let go that month.
It would definitely enamor your staff and your senior management team, because it gives people a chance to actually say some things around clients that you would never hear had you not had that opportunity and a capacity to say, yeah, well, they never pay on time, they're always late, it's difficult to deal with them or get anyone there. Shedding some of that, and again, the difficulty is you lose that client, you're losing a stream of income, no matter what the size of it. And I think when you get over the fact that by engendering a happier organization, you will probably find a replacement, if not more than one replacement for that business that you've shed, and that's where the positive is. And I guess in those environments, you get a chance to talk about that and go, well, if your staff are actively going, yeah, we've got rid of that business, but I've got a few targets in mind that we need to push to get into the family, so to speak. Yeah, it would set quite a different view of the world. That's interesting, mate. Very interesting. All right, let me get to one of my favorite questions in the podcast process is for you. It's the nature versus nurture question. Are leaders born or made?
Given how we opened this podcast, you might think that I would tend towards the nature element, having come from someone, a group of family members that I identified as strong leaders. Look, my sense is leadership is a skill that can be learned, and like anything in life, I think there's maybe some people that have a more natural aptitude to leadership and management than others, but it fundamentally is a skill that can be learned. Our sweet spot in our organization is dealing with people, or growing the leadership and management capability of people that tend to have come through quite technical or functional roles. They've maybe worked in a manufacturing plant, they've been working on the line, and now they've been promoted into a team leader role. The challenge for most of those people is they're very functionally strong or very technically strong, but no one shows them how to be a good leader, and that's our sweet spot, I guess, is helping those people. And we absolutely 100% believe that you can grow great leaders out of people that have an open mind, that are willing to learn, that are willing to take on new skills, and they are absolutely skills that can. So if I was to choose one in the binary survey, I think they're nurtured. I think they can be learned, but some come to the table with a bit more natural aptitude than others.
It's funny you say that. It's not binaries only as much as you make it. So the fact that I said, are they born or made? And it's cool to look at it that way. And I've never actually thought of it, because no one's ever asked me the question, what do I think? But I reckon with that kind of question, it's more you get in and the gut feeling in most responses, like the one that you've just given me, is that, yeah, there are those that seem to have that X factor or the aptitude for being a leader if they get those opportunities. And then there are those that can be made. And as a adjunct to the podcast that I'm doing at the moment, I've done 7 now interviews with and serving military people in the Australian context, and they're very big advocates for, yes, leadership can be made. And if you've got the right people involved that have got that open mind, like you talk about, you can develop anyone into leadership roles. It's how much are you willing to push to stay as a leader or to increase your leadership capabilities is a very individual question, because people can give you all the tools in the world, but if leadership is not something you want to seek because there are expectations of leaders that there aren't on followers, then you'll choose not to do it. And yeah, the military context versus the corporate context that you'll give me, the overlays are very stark, but the differences are very stark as well, in that in that context, you're building a leader at every level of the organization, not that management function, because it's assumed that at every level they've got that ingrained in how they operate. But it's a very unique context. So I can't always say that the comparison between a military or policing context is the same as the corporate world, because they're very different drivers in those different industry sectors.
I see very tight parallels, though, between military and corporate. I think we've seen a huge evolution in military leadership. If we go back, centuries or maybe over even 1 century, the style of leadership tend to be there was, kind of a few generals who supposedly knew what they were doing. There was a whole lot of, say, reasonably ill-informed, or their perception ill-informed people in the field that were very expendable, and it was just about, let's sacrifice 20,000 men over there and let's sacrifice 13,000 men over there, and hopefully we'll make some ground. I think you've seen the evolution in military leadership of them understanding that you do need leaders at every single level. And if you're waiting for a chain of command to get a message from the front line where a decision has to be made immediately, and you're trying to get up through 7 ranks back to someone to make a call, it's too late. It's all over. And I draw a very, very similar context to that in a business environment where, you need people with leadership capability and, importantly, leadership confidence. And we see that's a big issue. Those people that get promoted into a leadership role, and they're like, hey, look, I'm loving the title, I'm loving the pay rise, but I've really got no idea what to do as a leader. So they really lack the confidence, and that can be a real disaster recipe. If you do have people throughout your organization through all sorts of levels that have leadership, then things happen quickly, they get them solved. People tend to think for themselves rather than waiting for someone to tell them what to do. So look, I see a massive number of parallels between building out almost everyone as a leader, even if your leadership piece is self-leadership. You've got to have leaders throughout your organization to be successful.
Yeah, no, could not agree more. Final area here, Ryan, and this one is about your leadership pathway. So looking back on what you've done and the things that you've achieved, would you do anything different, or the better question is, what would you say to a younger version of yourself about being a more effective leader going forward? If you could go back and get to the Ryan that was 15, 16 years old, what would you say to yourself about being a more effective leader, man?
Great question, Eric, and it's a compromising question for me because I'm not someone who lives in regret. I very much go, hey, yesterday was yesterday, can't change that. Let's figure out how we can do better today and better tomorrow. But in the context of what advice would I give a younger self, I started my own business when I was 23, so I've kind of been in the zone of leadership. But if I think about the level of leadership capability I had at 23, it's terrifying to think about how much I've maybe evolved is probably the word over that time. And I think can accelerate that evolution, but a big part of it is experience, right? And I have a favorite quote from a very famous yachting commentator called Peter Montgomery, and he says, experience is what you get right after you need. And I think it's such a great quote, because even if I could give my 20-year-old self great leadership insights, I'm not sure I'd have the context to be able to understand them and make use of them at that time. You kind of need some of that experience to develop. Look, that said, I think I'd probably come back to the focus on your self-awareness. Think about how you operate and how that affects those around you. That would be a valuable piece of advice to give my younger self.
Brilliant. Look, Ryan, thank you for your time. This has been an awesome podcast, and always appreciate the time people give to talking about their leadership pathway. So just before we sign things off, can you maybe a bit of a plug to what you do with the Breakthrough Company for those that are listening before we sign off, mate?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Appreciate the opportunity to do that. So as I said earlier, look, our sweet spot is really developing the leadership capability of operational managers. So that would typically look like people that have come through that functional or technical role in a business. We tend to be very strong in the areas of engineering, manufacturing, construction. We do some high tech as well because they have that same challenge of technically brilliant people, but sometimes lacking the leadership capability. So, those are the areas that we make a big difference in. We've developed a learning methodology which we think just completely smashes the old approach to learning, which by and large is pretty ineffective. We could probably do another hour on the podcast of how leadership learning goes wrong, and we feel like we've really broken the mold there and brought a learning methodology to market that makes a huge difference, that it's not just about knowledge transfer, it's actually about embedding behavior in your organization. So that's a real focus for us. If you're interested to learn more, go to thebreakthrough.co. It's up on our website there, or always open to connect directly with people. Search me up on LinkedIn, Ryan Castle on LinkedIn. Happy to connect and share insights, share knowledge, and see where it goes from there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ryan. I'll make available the link to your website, obviously, so people can go in and have a look. And yeah, if you're interested in what Shane and the good folks at the Breakthrough Company can offer, reach out to Ryan and the team, which would be great. And switching back to the podcast, thank you everyone for following what we're doing here. Please share the content here, and particularly the focus being that we're trying to get people to listen to others about their leadership experience, and hopefully you can take something away, which I definitely have from this podcast session. So for those listening, this has been Talking Leadership. Thanks again, and we'll catch you all on the next podcast.